بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين وعلى آله وأصحابه الطاهرين ما دام ما في السماوات والأرضين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما اللهم إنا نسألك علما ينفعنا اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا ورزقا واسعا وعملا متقبلا وشفاء من كل داء نوينا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والإفادة والاستفادة والحث على التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسوله صلى الله عليه وآله وصحبه وسلم وبعده السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. Alhamdulillah, all thanks and praise due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, who has once again afforded us the opportunity to acquire such knowledge that will guide us to and guide us along the straight path bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Without further ado, our idea would basically be to cover 1, 2, 3, 4 pages if possible this evening. We had started our discussion in relation to a contracted item that happens to be usurious. So you're buying something and that item has been termed as usurious. The example that we look at now would be bay'ul huli. A person is going to a jewelry store. So you're going to be purchasing jewelry. You're paying in rands and you're going to be receiving a piece of jewelry, be it gold or be it silver, in lieu of your rands. So when we analyze this particular transaction, what do we find? On the one side you have money, fiat money. On the other side you have jewelry in the form of gold and silver. So in light of the narration of the Prophet ﷺ, what do we find? We find that they are both usurious items but belonging to different generic groups. The one group would be fiat money and the other group would be gold or silver, whatever the case may be. What are the rules and regulations relating to that? I speak under correction, but we had alluded to that in previous lessons. Today we will read through and discuss that particular phenomenon bi'idhnillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So bay'ul huli, the text reads as follows: هيا بنا أيها الطالب الكريم نحلل بيعا شائعا آخر ألا وهو بيع الحلي ذهبا كان أو فضة لا غيرهما. We are speaking about, so oh noble student, let us analyze another fairly common sale, and that would be the sale of jewelry, whether it be gold or silver, لا غيرهما, nothing else. In today's time what we find is, we find jewelry but they're made from other raw materials. They not from gold or silver. If the jewelry item that you are purchasing is made up from any other material, then it's not going to be a usurious item. You buy a necklace, for example, and it happens to be a diamond necklace. The entire necklace is made up of diamonds. What type of transaction is this? Is it a usurious transaction or not? Our scholars say it's not referred to as a usurious transaction because not gold and silver. It is only really gold and silver that would constitute as jewelry. مرحبا. والذهب والفضة ربويان بنص الحديث كما قد رأيتم. So gold and silver, you're purchasing a gold necklace or you're purchasing a silver necklace. Gold and silver are considered to be usurious items. بنص الحديث. This is by the virtue of the narration. كما قد رأيتم, as you have seen in this narration. وهما لا يصيران غير ربوين بالصناعة وصيرورتهما حليا بعبارة أخرى. So what happens is, if you have gold and silver is usurious whatever form it takes. Whether you apply the manufacturing element and you take this gold and you manufacture it into a necklace, the fact that it has changed form doesn't mean now that it is no longer considered to be usurious. That's according to the majority of scholars. So if I have a ingot of gold and you have an ingot and it weighs exactly the same, so I exchange one for one, that would be valid. But now if I have an ingot and you want to exchange it for an item of jewelry, the same rule applies. It must be hand for hand, it must be equal, and the sale must be a cash sale. So gold on the one side and gold on the other side, irrespective of what form it takes, it is still usurious, and therefore it must be equal for equal, like for like. That's basically what the text is saying. وَهُمَا لَا يَصِيرَانِ غَيْرَ رِبُوِيَّيْنِ بالصناعة وصيرورتهما حليا. The fact that you change it into jewelry doesn't change the status quo of the gold. بعبارة أخرى, expressing ourselves a bit differently, لا تنفك قيود الربا عن الذهب والفضة مهما كانت صورتهما. Gold and silver, whatever the form may be, it is always considered to be usurious. مضروبين, whether it is minted كان أو غير مضروبين, or it's not minted. تبرا أو حليا, whether you find it in a gold ingot form or whether you find it in a jewelry form, it is exactly the same. So I think it's a very simple example, but let's give it nevertheless. I have a gold coin, pure gold coin. Pure gold coin would now be, let's say, 22 carat. So, and it's 100 grams. And you have a necklace, it's 100 grams and it's 22 carat. Can I exchange my gold ingot or my gold coin for that necklace? Yes, it would be absolutely permissible. Can you tell me, look, according to the majority of scholars, that yes, it's the same carat and it's the same weight, but here's an added element, the manufacturing element, forming it into jewelry. I want you to give me 115 grams of the coins, and then I'll give you the item of jewelry. You cannot do that in terms of the majority of scholars, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. Now, وفي هذه الأيام غالبا, so now we come to our times now. في هذه الأيام غالبا تشتري الحلي من الذهب والفضة بعملة من العملات. In today's time, you're not going to buy gold for gold or silver for silver. It does happen sometimes, and many times our people sometimes that particular transaction may be Islamically invalid. For all intents and purposes, a person may have the best of intention. He comes to the jeweler, and what happens is he says, you take my old jewelry and you give me a new set of jewelry. So there's that particular exchange, there's a sale. There are conditions governing that particular sale. I mean, the easiest way out of it would be that you sell your old jewelry to the jeweler, and then you purchase, he pays you for it. That's one transaction done. And then in a separate transaction, you purchase the new jewelry that you want. That would be a better way of going about it. Be it as it may, في هذه الأيام, these days غالبا, generally, تشتري الحلي من الذهب والفضة. When you buying gold and silver jewelry, how do you purchase it? بعملة من العملات. You use a particular currency, rands for example. والعملات أيضا من السلع الربوية. So now if we're going to look at the rands that you are paying for the gold or silver jewelry, we're saying that currency is also considered to be a usurious item. لا بالنص, not because the Prophet ﷺ said rands for rands and dollars for dollars and euros for euros, not because the Prophet ﷺ verbatim said it, but بل بإعطاء العملات حكم الذهب والفضة, because we give the currencies, rands, dollars, euros, we give it the same ruling that we have given gold and silver. Why? Because they share in the same, what was it last week, ratio legis. The underlying reasoning is exactly the same. So in other words, we treat money, fiat money, exactly the same that we treat gold and silver. So now if you think about it, so how much in the first group we have now 3 items. We have gold, silver, and we have rands. Now when you were exchanging gold for silver, there can be inequality in terms of the amount. I give you 1 gold coin and then you give me 10 silver coins. Now we added another item to that group, and that's money. So what can happen is you give me 10 gold pieces and I give you 10,000 units of rands. No problem in terms of the discrepancy, but it must be cash. Like we gave the example of the foreign exchange. The same basically applies to when you're purchasing gold and silver from the jeweler. فترى أيها الطالب الكريم أن بيع الحلي في أيامنا هذه إذا كان العوض عملة فهو في ضوء الحديث الشريف والتكييف الفقهي بيع جنسين مختلفين من الزمرة الأولى فيصح بتحقق شرطي الحلو والتقابض. And that is exactly the point that we are mentioning over here. So you see, O noble student, that the sale of jewelry in today's time, when you are paying in currency, in light of the noble hadith that we have read, what would it be? It would basically be when you're selling what are you selling? Jinsaini. Two items. The one belongs to one generic group and the other one belongs to another generic group, like gold and silver. Right? من الزمرة الأولى, and it all belongs to the first category. فيصح, this will be valid as long as two conditions are met. What are the two conditions? It must be cash, and reciprocal taking possession of the commodity and the counter value must happen immediately. Now, so what are they? Okay, it's mentioned now here. شرط الحلول لا يجوز لك إذن أن تشتري الحلي بثمن مؤجل. It is therefore not permissible for you to purchase jewelry بثمن مؤجل. So you purchase it now, the jeweler gives you the jewelry, but you're going to pay at a later stage. So in our terms, in terms of our modern normal terminology, we would say, is it permissible for you to purchase jewelry on credit? And the simple answer to that would be no. It is not permissible for you to purchase jewelry on credit. بحيث تقبض الحلي عند العقد وتدفع الثمن فيما بعد. In a sense that you take the jewelry now and you're going to pay for it at a later stage, that is not going to be valid, and Allah SWT knows best. أما تفضل سيدي.
When Malak says on credit, it almost gives the impression that you're saying like with a credit card.
Barakallah fiqh.
Like Malak means like a deferred sale.
Absolutely. Yeah. Now that you mentioned it, I was thinking, as I was saying it, I was thinking about the credit. So if you go to the jeweler, I'm asking a question, and hopefully in the process of asking the question, the answer will come to light. So you go to the jeweler and you have your credit card, and let's just say, to make things simple, that the jeweler that you're purchasing from, they bank with FNB, First National Bank, and you also happen to bank with First National Bank. So now you go with your credit card. So you purchase the jewelry, and then you swipe your credit card. So what happens now is that you have purchased it using your credit card, but you paid it immediately. Because the moment you swipe your credit card, it means that amount is, and that the bank basically on your behalf pays, but they pay immediately. And now there's a debt that you incur towards the bank, and you're going to paying the bank over time. So if you buy jewelry with your credit card, they're receiving the money immediately. So in as far as the sale is concerned, is a cash sale. It's only what happened in the process is that you've incurred a debt towards the bank, which is a different question altogether. All you need to ensure is that you pay the bank timeously to avoid interest. Because if you're not going to pay them timeously, then you're going to incur interest. Then a transaction which started off permissible becomes impermissible down the line. Now, so Jazakallah khair for that, because it's an interesting thing because of the jargon. Like I'm using the word credit in a particular way, so it's very important that we highlight that. And it's an added question now. So the first question is, can you purchase jewelry on credit? In other words, that you're going to get the jewelry now, but you're going to pay the sale at a later stage? No. Can you purchase jewelry using your credit card? Yes, because the merchant is going to be paid immediately. In terms of the contract, he's not like taking possession of the money in a real sense, but constructively, because the money is going into that person's account, is something which we will discuss as well, inshallah.
Unless using the term lughatan, whereas the lughawi usage of the word credit is kind of, it's rare. When Malay uses the word credit, you mean it lughatan, like not cash.
Not cash, deferred, yeah.
But what I'm saying is that particular usage of the word is rare.
No.
The more common understanding of the word credit is the istilahi term, as in credit card.
Yeah. So the word, this is a very important discussion, because it could potentially serve as a barrier for understanding. I'm using a technical term, but I'm using it in a particular sense. But you understanding the same word, but you're understanding it in a different sense. I don't know if we've discussed this issue before, but language has this dual, it's like a dual-edged sword for me. the language. Why is it a dual-edged sword? Language is a means of empowerment. You can empower yourself through language. But then also language, particularly jargon within language, can very well serve as a barrier for learning. And consciously we find our scholars, they want to dispense of the jargon and they want to know what does a jargon represent. You know, what do you mean thereby? So it's very important. And I didn't think it's going to come up in this particular way. But it actually, just using the term credit, would be credit in terms of a deferred payment, that's not permissible. But using your credit card to purchase a building is absolutely permissible. Why? Because it's a cash sale. The buyer is getting paid, and a proof for that would be what? In certain instances, certain companies do not accept payment by a debit card. It must be a credit card. Because not, but look, that could also be for an external reason. The external reason being that when a person purchases with a credit card, then a third party like the bank takes responsibility to ensure that the seller gets the money. So that could also be a reason. But one of the reasons would, I'm thinking probably would be that, you know, when you swipe it, it's a guaranteed payment. The merchant is guaranteed that they actually getting the payment from a credit card because of the guarantees that are backing it, which tells me also that it could very well be a cash, not necessarily something which needs to be explored, but inshallah those two masalas are clear. Barakallahu fikum. شرط الحلول لا يجوز لك إذن أن تشتري الحلي بثمن مؤجل, with a deferred price, بحيث تقبض الحلي عند العقد, that you take the jewelry at the time of the sale وتدفع الثمن فيما بعد, but you pay at a later stage. Now, amma, and this was the question I think that we spoke about last week, about lay buying something. أما إذا لم تقبض الحلي, as for when you go to the jeweler, you see something that you like, there's a necklace, that لم تقبض الحلي, you don't take possession of it, بل تتفق مع البائع, you agree with the seller, with the jeweler, على شراء الحلي, that you're going to purchase it. ثم إدخار الحلي عند البائع, but you're going to keep it with the jeweler. You agree that I'm going to buy this حتى تسد المبلغ الكامل, until you settle the entire amount بالتقسيط, with installments. So this is basically what we refer to as a lay-by. هل يجوز هذا أم لا? Is this permissible or not? So is it permissible to lay by jewelry? نعم. أقول وبالله التوفيق. هذه المعاملة, this particular transaction, if you want to analyze it, what's happening, and this is an important thing in terms of buying and selling. You know, when we go and we buy and sell, we just buy and sell. One of the most interesting discussions I had, alarming at the same time also, was with a gentleman, discussing the underlying contract for a bank account. So you have a bank card. So I asked the person, what type of bank card is it? He said, no, it's a bank card. So in other words, a bank card is a bank card. There's nothing more to it. No, there's much more to it. And one of the benefits of reading through Islamic Contract Law is that we now start looking at our daily transactions and actually giving it a format. If the default would be that it's probably upon a valid format, but it could very well be that it's on a format which is not sanctioned by the Sharia. It's one of those, what terminology did we use? Desirables and undesirables. It's one of those undesirable things. So now when a person lay-buys jewelry, you ask him, what were you doing? He says, no, it's just a lay-buy. What is a lay-buy in real terms? And when you understand that breakdown of a lay-buy, you say, look, this in terms of the Sharia would be permissible. So lay-buying jewelry, what's it all about? So هذه المعاملة في بداية الأمر. A lay-buy in essence is really what? In the initial stages, اتفاق بين العاقدين. There's an agreement between the buyer and the seller. من المشتري وعد بالشراء. What does the buyer say? The buyer say, I'm hereby unilaterally promising that I'm going to buy this thing. أو رغبة في الشراء, or at the very least, it's a desire to purchase. Now, it's a unilateral commitment to purchase or desire to purchase. ودفع ثمن تقسيطا, and he says, I'm going to pay for it in installments تفيذا للوقت, and that is like reifying my commitment to purchase. I'm going to purchase, I'm backing up that commitment to purchase by giving installments. أو تحقيقا للرغبة حتى يجتمع المبلغ الكامل عند البائع, until the entire amount is amassed by the seller. ومن البائع, and from the seller side, what is it? ادخار الحلي. I'm going to store this, I'm taking it off the shelf, right? I'm going to store it. Why? For the interest of the buyer. وهذا لا يعد بيعا بعده. Until this point in time, it is not considered to be a sale. بل وعدنا على البيع. Rather, it is a promise to engage in a sale. So no sale has been concluded as yet. والبيع ينعقد عندما يجمع المشتري المبلغ كامل عند البائع. Now, the sale is actually enacted when the entire amount is to be found, when the buyer has gathered the entire amount by the seller. فترى أن قلوي التعامل مع الربوي من الحلو والتقابل متحققان عند انقضاء فيصح والله أعلم. فترى, you see, أن قيود التعامل, that the restrictions, the clauses which are required to be there when dealing with a usurious item. And what are the clauses? It must be cash. A reciprocal possession must take place. In this particular scenario, you find that mutahaqqiqan, it is actually realized when? Not at the time when they entered into the engagement, but more importantly, at the time when the sale was enacted. So would there be a problem with this type of sale? Absolutely not, and Allah SWT knows best. So we've looked at 3 questions so far. Can you purchase jewelry on credit? No. Can you purchase jewelry with a credit card? Yes. Can you lay by jewelry? Absolutely. Yes, there's no problem in that particular regard.
Just
no one knows best.
on the second point, can you purchase with a credit card? It's not like yes ala al-itlaq. It's yes with the condition that it's an immediate transfer.
Yes, on condition that it's an immediate transfer. But in the ensuing discussions, what's going to happen is that the constructive transfer, sometimes it happens immediately, and that's why I gave the example, that the merchant, his banker, and your banker is the same banker. It's the same.
Yes.
But now when it differs, what are the issues? Like for example, I go to the jeweler, he banks with Standard Bank. I bank with FNB.
Right.
So what's going to happen? I pay for it. I pay for it now. Even if I have a debit card, I pay for it now. So what happens is when I pay for it now, that amount is withdrawn from my account. But that amount is withdrawn from my account, but not placed immediately into the merchant's account. What happens is the banks have arrangements between themselves, and they have like times, let's say every 12 hours, that reconciliation of payments are made. So it will be deferred. Now what I found is that some scholars, contemporary scholars, that constructive payment, they consider it to be a challenge. But other scholars don't consider it to be a challenge and would consider it to be valid. I speak under correction, but Mln Muhammad Carr rahimahullah, I don't know if he has a written fatwa in this particular regard, but he permitted like unrestrictedly that type of transaction, and the reason for that was that you're going to cause people to fall into difficulty. What are the alternatives? The alternatives is, particularly in South Africa, in Cape Town, you tell a person, but there are alternatives. Look, I suggest here in the book that what you do is, how difficult is it to go and withdraw the cash and pay for the cash, pay for the item. But that is not without criticism.
It could be potentially quite difficult because you have a limit on the amount and all those things.
All of those things, and also in South Africa, Allah protect. There's always a safety aspect, and not to become.
Is part of the reasoning? I'm just asking. Is part of the reasoning for the permissibility? I mean, other than the umum balwa thing, like a form of, I think it's called hawala. Is that? I'm just thinking, would that work?
Look, what happened is that how that contract is structured between the merchant and his bank, right? That's a different issue altogether. What we're focusing on here is when the money gets withdrawn from your account. In other words, your account was at 100,000. You pay 10,000. that immediately that money is taken off from your account. But now the point is, when does that money get into the other account? What the scholars also add to that, as we will read, is they say, look, as long as that money doesn't reflect in your account, you shouldn't administer that money. It's yours. It's been mined, but you haven't taken possession of it yet, so don't administer. But they would, my understanding of Mln Carr's position was, he would consider that to be a cash transaction. Cash meaning that you took the jewelry and you consider to have paid for it. In the constructive sphere of things. And the argument there would be like if we were to impose on people that you can't pay like that, you must make, yes you can, like personally, again, personally I would try my level best to draw the cash and pay the cash, right? But how practical is that for everybody? And certain circumstances, for certain people it's just not possible.
Contemporaries name it Qad Hukmi. I think it was Qardawi or Ali Jumwa or someone, they actually say that is what they consider it to be.
There was
Yeah, that's the
no, that's the whole thing, because what happens is you have a qabd haqiqi and you have a qabd hukmi. You have like a real taking possession of it. Even in the first instance, when we have the same merchants and I swipe the card, you've been paid, you've taken possession of your money, but not in real terms, but in constructive terms. So there's a book that's at the madrasa also, it's like one book dedicated particularly to card payments. Some CD Nizar, I speak under correction, but he has this interesting issue to look at. Barakallahu fikum. شرط التقابض عادة المشتري يقبض الحلي ويستسلم من البائع في مجلس العقد. Generally the buyer, he will take possession of the jewelry and make istislam, in other words again take possession of it from the seller في مجلس العقد, in the contractual sitting, over the counter that is. فقبض البيع الحلي لا كلام فيه غالبا. So in terms of taking possession of the commodity, which is the jewelry, generally there's no question about it. والمشتري بدوري يدفع الثمن. The seller playing his role now, what does he do? He pays for it. So imagine yourself in a jewelry store, you're now purchasing the jewelry. So now they package it very nicely and they give it over to you and you take hold of it. There's no question about that. Now you have to pay for it. So how are you going to pay for it? والدفع هذا إما أن يكون حقيقة وإما بنائيا. I can't think now where we got that term from now. But والدفع, when you pay for it, you either paying for it in real terms. What do you mean by real terms? Is you have hard cash with you and you're paying for it with the hard cash. That's the one way. أو إما بنائيا. Bina'i, you're constructive. So you're making a payment, but it's not like you're taking the notes out of your pocket, and you're paying. No, you're making a payment, but it's a constructive payment. إذا كان الدفع حقيقة, if the payment is a real payment, بأن يناول المشتري البيع العملات الورقية, that the buyer gives notes, like what we refer to as cash. The buyer has cash in his pocket and he takes the cash out of his wallet and he gives it to the person. فهذا لا شك في جوازه. There is no question about the permissibility of this. لحصول التقابض من الجانبين في مجلس العقد. Why? Because reciprocal possession of the jewelry and the price for it was taken within the contractual sitting. Now, وإن كان الدفع الحالي بأي طريق أخرى, and if the payment is in any other way, فهو دفع بنائي, then it is referred to as a constructive payment. And I think in today's time most people operate in constructive payments. And a lot of, it's almost like a daily, I know it's an exaggeration, but the constructive payments, it's always under innovation. Like a constructive payment of something would be, initially what you did was you had your card and you swipe your card. After you swipe your card, now you can tap your card. Right? now what happens is you have, what do they call that?
Snap scan.
Snap scan. So what happens is you have your phone basically serves as the medium to your bank card, which basically takes the money from there, and you have a snap scan. You know? So there's a lot of innovation. Be it as it may, if you have the cash in your pocket and you pay the cash, that's what we term as a real payment. You're paying for the jewelry. Anything else, no matter what the form may be, is a constructive payment. Whether you, even if you do an EFT, sometimes you can do an EFT right there. So you do an EFT, that's a constructive payment. You're paying for it, yes, but it's a constructive payment. It's not hand to hand. If you do your snap scan, you swipe or you tap, it's all constructive payments. So we basically, by and large, I know a friend of mine, he doesn't deal with cash at all. And his preferred type of payment is snap scan. Because, you know, it's like the most convenient. And Allah SWT knows best. Okay, so now we're dealing with these constructive payments. وَهُوَ أَنْوَاءٌ حَسْبَ الْإِخْتِيَارَاتِ لَدَى الْمُشْتَرِي. So there are many types, depending on what options, you know, the buyer has. وَوَسَائِلُ الدَّفْعِ الْبِنَاعِ الدَّفْعُ الضِّمْنِ مِمَّا تَكَادُ تَتَجَدَّدُ يَوْمِيًا. It is something which almost like every day it's being renewed. عَلَى كُلِّ حَالٍ نَذْكُرُ أَهَمَّا. We will mention the most important ones of those, the current ones of it, basically. So what does it read as? وإن كان الدفع الحالي لو سدد المشتري الثمن بإجراء بطاقته المصرفية. If the buyer is going to pay by swiping his bank card, whilst his bank and the merchant bank is exactly the same, فهذا الدفع الضمني بمثابة الدفع الحقيقي. There is no difference between paying cash and swiping your card. For all, what's that English term they use now? For all intents and purposes. It just came to me on the last minute, lucky. On the last minute. For all intents and purposes, it's the same. I give you 10,000 as cash. You banking with FNB, I banking with FNB, I take my debit card, I swipe it. The moment it comes off from my account, it's going to reflect in your account. Because, you know, it's like, they explain it like diagrammatically. It's just basically coming out of your account from your box and it's been putting into the other boxes as simple as that. It's exactly the same. No.
There's a question, I don't know if I'm going to take it now at the end, but it's,
Bismillah.
it is relevant. Said Ibrahim Jabbar asked, it's on the screen.
There is an option for immediate payment in banking apps. Should this then be done? Subhanallah, that's a lovely option. So this would fall under the idea of fattakullah mastata'tum. You know, obey Allah to the best of your degree, best of your ability. So that's a really nice question. The challenge would be, and I'm just thinking of a counter argument. The counter argument would be that if you opt for the immediate payment, my understanding is you're going to be paying at least 45 Rand more. And then what happens is on the app they tell you that it's going to be an immediate payment, and in practice it is generally immediate, but there's a disclaimer. The disclaimer says, like, you can't guarantee the payment is going to be done immediately.
Within an hour, they say,
So, but within a certain period, I think maybe they do that to cover themselves, so that you know, you can hold them to account that, look, I went for the immediate option, but immediacy, you know, immediate. The counter argument to that is what is meant by immediacy. You know, so immediacy very much is left to the urf, to the. How do you translate to urf?
Some of the books specifically say before qabla tafaruq, right? So that would be immediate. Still.
Yeah. So then you have that. So that would basically govern this particular issue in terms of the immediacy. But still, too, man, what I'm saying is that you have. So you were Standard Bank, I'm with FNB. I'm buying the jewelry. So what happens? I swipe my card. But on the banking app, I have an option. My option is that I can effect the payment immediately, and I pay an extra 45 Rand. In the bigger scheme of things, so this 45 Rand, I'm paying that for that, but I'm paying 45 Rand to get me closer to the ideal as established by the Prophet. It's a 45 Rand well spent. if a person argue to the contrary and say, look, no, like it says, but it's not really immediate. Then we say, look here, that is the best immediacy that you can get. That immediacy is governed by an urf. What custom? Not the custom of you and I, but the custom of the technology. So due to the constraints of the system that facilitates for these payments, it only comes like after 5 minutes or after 10 minutes or so forth, and it is something that you can't go away from. So this is closer to this. So that would be a very good thing to do in terms of the immediate payment.
I have personal experience with this. I bought an item once, but it was an EFT, but we were with different banks, so we chose the immediate option. But because I'm purchasing this item from this person who doesn't know me and I don't know him, so I had to wait there until it reflected in his account. And it took, they said it will take less than, I think, 30 minutes or 60 minutes, but it did in fact take a good 25 minutes or so. And then we were like standing around there waiting for this to come through.
Yeah, what's worse than that is like the whole thing about, the relativity of time. So waiting kettle never boils. So that 25 minutes must have been very long. Like you wanting to move on, and he's wanting to move on, and it becomes like long in that particular regard.
But at least if it's riba, we're waiting in the majlis will update the call.
That's what I mean, Then at least you can do that,
So you're still physically together, so alhamdulillah. It's
an effort on the side of the 45 rand ad waiting.
Well, if that's what taqwa requires,
No, Allah make it easy. Barakallah
So
fikum.
you must come early to buy it jewelry.
لأن المبلغ يسحب من رصيد المشتري. We're talking about this case now when the merchants are the same and you're paying now using your card. So what happens now is that يسحب لأن المبلغ, because the amount يسحب, it is withdrawn من رصيد المشتري, from the buyer's account, ويودع في رصيد البائع, and it is deposited into the seller's account على سبيل الفور, immediately. سواء في ذلك البطاقة الائتمانية وبطاقة دفع اعتماد, بطاقة المدين, whether you have a debit card or a credit card. I forgot that I researched this thing. Whether it's a credit card or a debit card, is basically the same thing. That processes happen immediately. Now, وأما إذا اختلفت مصرف البائع عن مصرف المشتري ففي هذه الصورة يتراخى حصول المبلغ في رصيد البائع. What happens now? This is the reality of the situation. If the merchant bank and your bank are different banks, then what happens is في هذه الصورة, in this particular instance, يتراخى حصول المبلغ في رصيد البائع. Then the amount to reflect in the merchant's account, it is delayed. It doesn't reflect immediately. فعندما يجري المشتري بطاقته, so when the buyer swipes his card, يسحب المال من رصيده, then the money is taken from his account. ولكن لا يودع مباشرة في رصيد البائع, but this money is not placed immediately in the seller's account. بل يتوقف ذلك الإيداع على بعض الإجراءات حسب النظام المنظم لهذا. But that is now pending on certain steps that needs to be taken within the process, and we refer to that process of when they this process of reconciliation in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. عندما يحصل أي تراخ في تبادل ربوي بربوي لا يصح العقد. So when you have any deferment, when you are exchanging a usurious item for a usurious item, لا يصح العقد, then the transaction is not valid. لكن بعض العلماء المعاصرين, certain contemporary scholars, ذهبوا, they are of the opinion إلى أنه يغتفر تأخير القيد المصرفي بصورة التي يتمكن فيها المستفيد بها من التسليم الفعلي للمدد المتعارف عليها في أسواق التعامل, على أنه لا يجوز للمستفيد أن يتصرف في المال, on condition, they say it's permissible, on condition that the seller in this particular regard, he does not use the money خلال المدة المغتفرة, in this interim period. He doesn't use that particular money. How can you use it? You place it as a collateral. You haven't taken possession of the money yet, but you're placing that money that you're expecting to reflect into your account as a collateral for something else. So you can, it's permissible, but you can't use that money in the interim. إلا بعد أن يحصل أثر القيد المصرفي بإمكان التسلم الفعلي, until that money actually reflects in your account. So you have this distinction in your bank account between the balance and available balance.
No.
I don't know if that would reflect as money is coming into your account. I don't think that, but clearly in your account. So just to take that particular conceptualization and apply it to if you were the seller. So in your mind you have, this is my available balance, but this is monies which are pending, which is definitely coming through. And up until it hasn't reflected in your account, you shouldn't be using that particular money. So in other words, at the end of the day, to ensure that I've actually really taken possession of it, even though in a constructive way. Wallahu alam. Wal ahwat. Now if you wanted to practice on, what do they call it now? A precautionary type of fiqh. Ihtiyatan. Not ihtiyatan by, saying things are impermissible or considering everything impermissible. But rather what you have is you have two options. And you have one option which is more precautionary. In other words, like you're in no form of a grey area, you're in complete white area. Then you can do the following if it's possible. Whilst not turning back and pointing your finger at other people who do it and calling whatever they're doing as invalid. No, wal ahwat is always in relation to your personal practice. So if this piece of advice is not to your brother who's doing it, or your sister who's buying, and swiping the credit card and they take the jewelry, not to invalidate her purchase of the jewelry. When we talk about ahwat is what we take to do in terms of our personal capacity. I'm going to do this. So what is the ahwat to do? والأحوط أيها الطالب الكريم في مثل هذا أن تختار قدر المستطاع. That the most precautionary thing to do, O student, in this particular regard is for you to تختار وسيلة دفع تؤمنك وصول المال إلى البائع فعلا قبل مفارقة المجلس. For you to choose a means of payment that will ensure that this money, whether it's real or constructive, actually gets to the buyer before you separate from him. So in other words, that's where the brother who asked that question about opting for that. So whatever means it is that you can employ that will guarantee, that is the ahwa thing. Not saying the opposite is impermissible, because some of the scholars have permitted it, but the more precautionary thing would be to do that in that particular regard. Wallahu a'lam. وقبل تجاوز هذه المسألة نبهك أيها الطالب الكريم على وجهة نظر أخرى تجاهها. So here we come to another issue altogether, and I think this one I can just basically explain بإذن الله سبحانه وتعالى. I'm just going to relax now and explain to you this masala, the last one, as opposed to reading through the entire text. There is a difference of opinion when it comes to jewelry from the outset. So if you're going to consider jewelry, like we explained in the middle, to be another form of gold or silver, and that's it. In other words, there's no difference between a necklace that's 22 karat and 100 grams of gold, and an ingot which is a 22 karat and 100 grams of gold. There's no difference between the two. That's the majority position. There is a position that is held by Ibn al-Qayyim al-Jawziyah and his teacher Ibn Taymiyyah. That particular view says that the moment you add the manufacturing element to gold and you manufacture an item of jewelry therefrom, it now comes out of the sphere of gold and now becomes a commodity. It becomes a merchandise. And since it becomes merchandise, it's now exactly the same like if I were to purchase a loaf of bread. If I purchase a loaf of bread using rands, that's a food stuff, and this is money commodity. So I can do it cash. I give you 20 rands and you give me the bread, or you give me the bread, I pay you at a later stage, no problem. Or what happens is, I pay you now, I describe the bread, and you deliver the bread at a later stage. So according to Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah, they consider the moment you add the manufacturing element to gold and it becomes jewelry, it now becomes a commodity, and you treat it like any other commodity. So in other words, there are no restrictions in that particular regard, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. That is a minority view. The author that I quote in this particular regard would be Rafiq Yunus al-Misri. Hafidhahullah wa ra'ah.
MashaAllah, you made it through 12 sessions before his name came up.
Yeah, Lucas included in the book. But what happened was, the first part when I read about him was in, he has a mawsu'a fi riba. It's like a thick book, mashallah, very beneficial. That's one book. He appropriated a particular view there, and he did not agree with Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah. But then he has a smaller booklet which he writes specifically dealing with, and he supports this view. Why does he support the view? He supports the view because it makes it easier for people who are dealing in jewelry. He's not looking at the level of micro, like, I go buy jewelry. A person is getting married, so he goes to the jeweler and he buys jewelry. That's a micro level. But if you look at it at a macro level or on a wholesale level, in order for jewelers to trade, it added great restriction upon them if it must be cash. So in other words, we spoke about this example before. Petrol is considered to be a cash commodity. It's always dealt with in cash. Therefore, there were certain restrictions on there. The fact that something is cash is considered to be somewhat restrictive, that you can only deal in this commodity in cash. Jewelry, if we're going to impose that cash condition, this is what he argues in the latter book, and then it makes it very difficult for Muslims to establish themselves, and they are somewhat disadvantaged when they don't have that credit facility available for them. So based on that, he argues, contrary to the previous view that he held, he argues for the view held by Ibn Taymiyyah and Qayyim al-Jawziyah. I think in terms of our micro practice, still basically in terms of conforming with the majority view, would be the best to go. If it is that the jeweler is involved in this and there's clear difficulty in terms of that, and then you can appropriate the view of Ibn Taymiyyah and Qayyim al-Jawziyah. Wallahu subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam. وَلِلَّهِ الْحَمْدُ مِنْ قَبْلِ وَمِنْ بَعْدِ. I think we're on to the 46 minutes, Harry. Marhaba. Are there any questions, Harry? Those have been covered. Barakallahu fikum jami'an wa jazakumullahu khairan wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh.